Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Tuesday, the 5th of November. Following Robert Murray McShane's reading scheme, we read Hosea chapter 11, which begins, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me." And there follows then words of judgment from God. And it's a perfect summary of what we read in the Old Testament, where God calls Israel, leads them out of Egypt, leads them through the wilderness, leads them into the promised land, gives them his laws, gives them his guidance, gives them what they need, and yet the people turn away from him and worship other gods and walk in paths not laid out by God himself. And we see this reflected throughout history, where time and again there's a great movement of God's Spirit, and God calls people, and a generation or two later, they're not quite so enthusiastic. Another generation or two, and they've lost the plot completely. And so the Roman Empire, which under Augustine had Christianity as the center, soon dissolved into all sorts of bickering and fighting and led to the Dark Ages. You had the Great Reformation in Germany, which affected all of Europe and changed the church, a powerful movement of God's Spirit. And yet Germany could end up being a country that could produce Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. In England, you had the Great Awakening with the Wesleys and the Whitefields, and the great movement of God's Spirit in the country. Today, over half the people say they're not Christian. And we've seen, and I believe we will see the same thing in other countries where there's a movement of God's Spirit. And I have my questions around America and the way the church is behaving in the elections. Yes, they were called by God, and there was a mighty move by God's Spirit, but I'm not sure that they are walking with God. And if we continued reading a few verses later, in verse 7, God says, "My people are determined to turn from me. Even though they call me God Most High, I will by no means exalt them." Even though they call me by the right name, they have my name on their lips, they say the right things, it was an outward and empty proclamation of God, because they do not walk in his ways. They are determined to turn from him. And it doesn't matter what name they use, it doesn't matter what they say, they're not walking in his ways. And today, as the Americans go to the polls, in a sense, has nothing to do with us, except that the Christian church in many parts have aligned themselves badly, and it will not reflect well on them. And quite apart from that, in our own lives, we need to say, God, keep us faithful. Lord, that we will not just have your name on our lips, but we'll have your Spirit in our hearts and your light shining through the way we live day by day, because that is the glory of the gospel. So recognize God's call on your life, and recognize the call to walk with him day by day, which is what we have his word for, and we spend time in it, asking him to guide us and use us. And as we do that, he's with us, and we are blessed.